Chapter 1201. Yi Liangxiu had only been in King Entertainment for half a year and was only an intern. She didn't even have a role with 3 lines. Wasn't it inappropriate for Ng Jie to take care of such a person? Kam asked what he was thinking, but Qin Amlin only glanced at him indifferently. You're getting better and better at your job. Kam didn't dare to say anything else, but he didn't agree in his heart. President Qin wasn't someone who couldn't distinguish between public and private matters. Even if this girl had served President Qin before, he couldn't break the rules. Moreover, Ng Jie might not be willing to take her. Regardless, Kam still brought Yi Liangxiu to Ng Jie. Ng Jie was 35 or 36 years old and had taken care of 4 or 5 international celebrities. It could be said that Ng Jie was a win vein. Whoever King Entertainment wanted to promote, they usually got Ng Jie to take care of. Those who could be taken care of by Ng Jie all the time were kings, queens, and international superstars. Just like Immerse Xiaoqi, Ng Jie had taken care of her for half a year and then stopped. Although Immerse Xiaoqi was known as Asia's little queen, in Ng Jie's eyes, she wouldn't be popular for long. She only knew how to create hype and not act. Kam brought Yi Liangxiu to Ng Jie. Ng Jie was training the newcomers of King Entertainment. This batch of newcomers, including Yi Liangxiu, had a total of 20 people. They were all top-notch in terms of appearance. However, the difference was that Yi Liangxiu was the only one who had been summoned by President Qin. Because of this, Ng Jie didn't like her very much. Immerse Xiaoqi was the same back then. Because she had a relationship with President Qin once, she was all kinds of arrogant and didn't take Ng Jie seriously. Ng Jie took care of her for half a year and then stopped taking care of her. Of course, she also watched coldly as Immerse Xiaoqi ran into a wall with President Qin. The young girl was too naive. Did she think that just because she slept with a man like President Qin, she had met her true love? President Qin had too many true loves. Ng Jie looked at Yi Liangxiu and pursed her lips sternly. Go to training first? Yi Liangxiu nodded. In fact, her leg was in great pain. Walking was already difficult for her. If she were to practice those splits now, it would kill her. However, she did not resist. She walked into the group of 20 students and endured the great pain to practice those movements. Ng Jie silently watched for a few seconds, then walked to the door with Kam. Kam respected Ng Jie a lot. In King Entertainment, no one would disrespect Ng Jie because President Qin thought highly of Ng Jie. The achievements of the artists Ng Jie groomed always met President Qin's expectations. What's going on? President Qin has to support every girl he's slept with. I don't want to wait on these little devils. Ng Jie frowned and looked at Kam. Kam quickly lit a cigarette for Ng Jie and handed it to her. I'm puzzled too. President Qin is actually just like that when it comes to women. He's not that obsessed. Ng Jie took a puff and scolded him with a smile. You're just speaking up for your boss. With that said, she turned around and looked at Yi Liangxiu. The little girl could actually take hardships. She forcefully endured the training. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead. Seeing that her expression had relaxed, Kam took the opportunity to say, how is it? She can take hardships, right? What's the big deal about being able to take hardships in this industry? Ng Jie glanced at him. Why do you think President Qin likes her so much? Or was there something special about her? Kam smiled bitterly. How would I know? If I knew, I would have told Ng Jie, wouldn't I? Ng Jie smiled and did not say anything. Since she didn't say anything, Kam didn't leave and stayed obediently. Chapter 1202. Everyone in the company knew how strict Ng Jie was, so she was in charge of all the new students. Those who couldn't take it would be fired immediately. King Entertainment didn't want popular young stars or starlets. After Ng Jie went in, she paid special attention to Yi Liangxiu. Judging from the girl's expression, it was her first time today. She knew President Qin a little. He was much more capable than ordinary people in certain aspects, so he definitely wouldn't let this girl have it easy. However, although Sister Ng thought about it, her request was still the same as before. Therefore, when they were dismissed in the afternoon, Yi Liangxiu felt that every bone in his body was no longer in place. Ng Jie looked at her indifferently and said, Go back first. I don't take people with me easily. This was no different from a rejection. Kam, who had been waiting for a long time, laughed bitterly. Actually, he had been watching coldly from the side just now. Yi Lianqiu was a virgin, and she had only been pampered by President Qin. Jie was really ruthless. She actually wanted her to do those things, and didn't make an exception at all. Now, she didn't soften at all. He wanted to speak up for Yi Lianqiu, but he knew Jie's temper. The more you pleaded, the more she wouldn't soften. Kam whispered to Yi Lianqiu, "Bear with it. No one can disobey what President Qin wants to do." Yi Lianqiu was a little surprised and looked at Kam with sweat all over her face. "I'll go back first, Jie," Kam said softly. "Think about it. Just treat it as me." Jie looked at him, and then at Yi Lianqiu. She smiled and said, "Why? Do you feel sorry for me? I've never seen you feel sorry for anyone in the company all these years." Kam laughed dryly and didn't say anything else. He went straight to the president's office. Qin Amlin was reading a document. When he heard the door open, he asked lightly, "How is it?" Qin Amlin was very sure that Kam had been gone for so long that there must have been some twists and turns. Kam hesitated for a moment. "I think President Qin should talk to Jie in person." Qin Amlin put down the document in his hand and looked at Kam. "She doesn't agree?" Kam nodded. "I think it's because of what happened to Mo Xiaoqi that Jie isn't willing to work with President Qin." Qin Amlin smoked a cigarette. "I asked her to bring Yi Lianqiu along, not because I wanted her. In fact, Qin Amlin didn't tell her that he and Yi Lianqiu didn't feel the same way at that time because he was paying attention to her feelings. On the contrary, he didn't care about it at all. It was an intimate experience that was beyond the senses. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but it left a deep impression on him. It was so deep that Qin Amlin would remember it for many years to come. It was so deep that he would have sex with many women later on, but none of them could compare to this. However, he was more willing to turn her into a unique work of art. She would become the top female star in the entertainment industry in the future. He had high hopes for her, and only Jie could bring her out. Qin Amlin changed the topic. "No need. If she can't even handle Jie, how can she survive in the complicated entertainment industry? She would have died halfway before she could become a superstar." Kam nodded. Just then, Qin Amlin put out his cigarette and said calmly, "Get someone to change the sheets in the lounge." Kam went to do it. Of course, she found out that President Qin wanted the young lady's first time. Chapter 1203. On the other side, Yi Lianqiu was carrying her little backpack and getting ready to get off work. The basic salary of an intern at King Entertainment wasn't high, 3,500. But if she was chosen to be a backup dancer or something, she would get a stipend of 200 to 300 each time. In a month, she would earn about 5,000 to 6,000. This income was precious to Yi Lianqiu. Her father was a professor who had been honest all his life. He only left her with 3 children and an 80-square-meter apartment. If it wasn't for what happened to Yi Sun, she wouldn't have dropped out of school and wouldn't have joined King Entertainment. Thinking of Yi Sun, Yi Lianqiu gripped her phone tightly. Yi Sun's life and death would be decided in this phone. She went to the changing room to change, and was about to leave when she bumped into Mo Xiaoqi and her manager, who were coming out of the changing room opposite. Mo Xiaoqi saw the hickey on Yi Lianqiu's neck. It was left by Qin Amlin, and it stung her eyes. She was indignant. She was now the Asia Queen, but President Qin didn't even look at her in the eye. Instead, he wanted this little girl who hadn't even grown up yet. Mo Xiaoqi sneered and walked towards Yi Lianqiu. Before she reached her, she had already slapped her. "Bitch!" She didn't have an advantage in height, and the slap landed squarely on Yi Lianqiu's chin. Immediately, 5 finger marks appeared. Yi Lianqiu pursed her lips and looked at Mo Xiaoqi. "Sister Mo, did I offend you in any way?" Mo Xiaoqi smiled coldly. "Just the fact that you climbed into President Qin's bed is enough to offend me." "I remember that President Qin doesn't have a girlfriend," Yi Lianqiu said calmly. Her voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. But Mo Xiaoqi interpreted it as a guilty conscience. She was used to doing whatever she wanted in King Entertainment, so she didn't care about anyone, especially the women that President Qin had doted on. She suppressed them both openly and covertly. As time went by, All the newcomers at King Entertainment would suck up to her whenever they saw her. It was just that Yi Liangxiu didn't know how to appreciate favors. Moreover, because of Yi Liangxiu, she had been frozen by the CEO. Although it was only temporary, there was no work for a month and no chance of exposure. Who knew if the fans would forget about her? After her dream of being the wife of King Entertainment CEO was shattered, Mo Xiaoqi paid special attention to her career. She would never allow anyone to be above her. She was already unhappy that Yi Liangxiu was summoned by President Qin, and President Qin even asked Ng Jie to take her with them. Mo Xiaoqi smelled danger. The newcomer in front of him actually dared to talk back to him. Mo Xiaoqi chuckled and fanned herself with her hand, making sarcastic remarks. Of course not. I'm just teaching you a lesson. Don't think that you can become famous just because you climbed into President Qin's bed. The entertainment industry isn't that simple. Yi Liangxiu pursed her lips tightly, almost forming a straight line. She said in a low voice, I've never thought about becoming famous, and I've never thought about standing in anyone's way. But Sister Mo thinks so highly of me. If I don't become famous, I'd be letting you down. Mo Xiaoqi's face flushed and then paled. She glared at Yi Liangxiu. You dare talk back to me? Do you know who I am? Mo Xiaoqi. Yi Liangxiu's voice was very soft as she said these 3 words slowly. It had been a long time since Mo Xiaoqi had been looked down upon like this. Who did a newcomer think she was? Chapter 1204. Mo Xiaoqi turned her head and saw Ng Jie appear. She immediately changed her expression and stomped her feet. She was 25 years old, but she was acting like a little girl in front of the 35-year-old Ng Jie. Look, Ng Jie, she's bullying me. The coquettish tone in her voice could make anyone shiver. Ng Jie didn't fall for this. She had been in the entertainment industry for more than a decade and had seen all kinds of people. If Mo Xiaoqi had any prospects, she wouldn't be making things difficult for a newcomer. However, she had witnessed Yi Liangxiu's unyielding character. She had quite a backbone, young lady. Mo Xiaoqi took the opportunity to add insult to injury. Ng Jie, I heard that President Qin asked you to take care of her. Are you sure you want to take care of someone with such mediocre talent? Ng Jie glanced at Yi Liangxiu and said mildly, Nobody can say anything about President Qin's arrangements. Her tone was neither warm nor cold. Coupled with the fact that she had used President Qin to pressure her, Mo Xiaoqi didn't dare to say anything else. She knew very well that her status as the Asian queen was given to her by King Entertainment. If the company decided to freeze her one day, she would be dragged down no matter how high she soared. Mo Xiaoqi was indignant, but she could only glare at Yi Liangxiu and leave angrily. Her manager followed her immediately. Ng Jie's gaze fell on Yi Liangxiu's face. After looking at it for a while, she asked, Where does your face and body hurt? Her question was filled with deep meaning, but Yi Liangxiu understood. She looked down. My heart hurts the most. She had no choice but to offer her body to Yi Sun because Yi Sun needed money, a huge amount of money. And it wasn't something that could be solved with money. Ng Jie looked at her for a long time before saying, Put some ice on it when you go home tonight. If you want to turn red, you have to take good care of your face. It can't be damaged. She paused for a moment. You can't survive in the entertainment industry without a pretty face. Yi Liangxiu nodded. She was not someone who did not know how to read people's expressions. She said softly, Thank you, Ng Jie. Ng Jie smiled faintly. Come with me. I'll walk you to the station. Yi Liangxiu was surprised, but Ng Jie was already walking forward. She still couldn't figure out what Ng Jie meant, but she still followed Ng Jie and left. Ng Jie's car was parked on the 2nd floor of the basement, which was where the company's higher-ups parked. She looked at the time as she walked, but Yi Liangxiu didn't say anything. It was only when they arrived at the parking lot that Yi Liangxiu noticed that Qin Anlin was opening the car door and getting into the car. Ng Jie called President Qin. Qin Anlin nodded. Then his gaze landed on Yi Liangxiu's face, and he was a little surprised. What happened? He asked with a frown. Before Yi Liangxiu could say anything, Ng Jie said, What else? Mo Xiaoqi slapped her. She paused for a moment. I'm going to take her to the hospital for a checkup. Qin Anlin looked at the palm print. Although it was quite heavy, It wasn't to the extent that she needed to go to the hospital. Ing Jie's meaning was clear. The injury was because of him. He glanced at Yu Liangxiu and said indifferently, "Yes, we should." He gestured to Kaim, who was stunned, to take a check for 500,000 yuan and give it to Yu Liangxiu. This was also to show respect to Ing Jie. He still had an important appointment, so he didn't say much and got into the car. Kaim drove and looked at President Qin's expression in the rearview mirror. She said, Ing Jie's attitude changed too quickly. Qin Anlin closed his eyes and didn't say anything. Kaim knew that President Qin didn't want people to talk about Yu Liangxiu. Chapter 1205. In the parking lot, Ing Jie looked at Yu Liangxiu and smiled. "Get in." Yu Liangxiu nodded and got in the car, sitting next to Ing Jie. Ing Jie drove the car out of the parking lot and narrowed her eyes at the road ahead. She said calmly, "Where do you live?" Yu Liangxiu was flattered and pursed her lips. "Peace Road." She added, "Ing Jie, I'll take the bus. Just drop me off at the front." How could she not tell that Ing Jie had asked her to go to the parking lot because she knew President Qin would be there? She felt grateful. Ing Jie was someone who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Ing Jie smiled and did not say it directly. Instead, she asked another question, "Are you short of money?" It was obvious that this little girl was a tough person. She had a rare pride in her. It was not the kind of tsundere, but it was similar to the style of ancient scholars. Nowadays, it could not be found in men, let alone a little girl. Ing Jie thought that Yu Liangxiu probably moved her because of her pride. There were many beauties in the entertainment industry, but not many of them were recognizable. Without personality, they could only be popular for a while and could not become an iconic figure of the times. She had requirements for the artists under her management. Mo Xiaoqi was not abandoned because she had a bad temper, but because she had no personality. She asked. Yu Liangxiu nodded. "I'm short of money." Ing Jie paused. "Is that why you came to King Entertainment?" "Yes." Yu Liangxiu nodded again. Sister Ing took out a thin and long cigarette from the console, lit it, and took a long drag. Then, she said faintly, "In the entertainment industry, you can either be an extra for the rest of your life and be happy. If you lack money, you have to go to the top. You can't go up or down, and you can be replaced at any time." Pei Chi looked at her. Ing Jie smiled again. "This industry is very cruel. It's not as simple as you think." After a long time, Yu Liangxiu said, "Thank you, Ing Jie." "You're welcome. Our interests are tied together." Ing Jie's tone was very indifferent, without much emotion. As the manager, she would take 10% of the artist's after-tax income. So, Ing Jie had always thought that she and the artist would advance and retreat together. She had always looked at the artist's ability. Yu Liangxiu didn't say anything more. For her, the most important thing now was not whether she could become famous, but whether she could save Yi Sun. Ing Jie sent her to Hepping Road. Yu Liangxiu bent down to say goodbye to her. Ing Jie looked into her eyes and said calmly, "Remember, don't do anything to anger President Qin. King Entertainment can raise you to a height that you can't even imagine." Yu Liangxiu was stunned. Ing Jie continued, "If you're smart, you know what to do." Under such a sharp gaze, Yu Liangxiu felt embarrassed, as if she had been seen through. Ing Jie didn't say anything else and drove away. Yu Liangxiu stood where she was for a long time. She took out her phone mechanically and flipped to the video she had taken. In the video, she could clearly see Qin Anlin's face and body, his expression as he leaned on her, and even the sweat dripping down his body. At that moment, she was a little conflicted. She knew what she was about to face, but she had no choice. Chapter 1206. Yu Liangxiu only feels sad when her mother is like this. Her father is a university professor. He married an uneducated childhood sweetheart. After a long time, I'm afraid they have no common language. But it's rare that they have been together for so many years, although they haven't been together. Su Cheng, the little bitch in Wang Saiyun's mouth, is Yi Sun's classmate, a typical rich girl, and Yi Sun has been very close. Yu Liangxiu has told Yi Sun more than once to keep a distance, but the 18-year-old Yi Sun is in love. How can he listen to her? Finally, something happened. Mom, I'm back. Yi Lianxiu put the bag on the sofa and said softly. Wang Kaiyun prayed again, then turned around and looked at her with burning eyes. Lianxiu, how's Yi Sun? Do you have any way to get him out? Every day since the accident, her mother has asked her in this tone. Yi Lianxiu feels a little tired. Mom, I'll find a way. She took the 2 checks. I'll hire the best lawyer for Yi Sun. Yi Mu stared at her with a little cold light in her eyes. Hire a lawyer? Do you want to kill your brother? She grabbed the check, looked at the signature on it, and then smiled coldly. Yi Lianxiu, are you bullying me because I can't read and can't see that this is your boss's check? You slept with him, didn't you? As she spoke, Mother Yi slapped Yi Lianxiu fiercely across the face. The force of the slap was so heavy that Yi Lianxiu's face tilted to the side. Her long hair spread across her cheeks, making her look indescribably miserable. Yi Lianxiu only felt a burning sensation on his face. His skin felt like it was about to burst, as if it would explode with a single touch. After a long time, she slowly turned back, but Wang Kaiyun had already cried. You are such a disappointing thing. How can you sleep with people? Your father's life has been ruined by you. Mom, what do you think I should do? Kneel down and beg Su Qing? Yi Lianxiu's heart was cold. Her mother valued her son and her daughter, but she was deeply hurt that her mother valued her son to such an extent. Wang Caiyun's expression was a little confused. Of course I have to. Kneel until she agrees to drop the charges. Lianxiu, I beg you, please save your brother. Yi Lianxiu's fingers gently caressed her face. It was swollen and painful to touch. However, her mother couldn't see her injuries. In her heart, there was only Yi Sun. She chuckled softly, and her voice became even softer. Mom, why don't you go? Mother Yi was stunned for a moment, and then burst into tears again. Yi Lianxiu, your mother doesn't know how to get out of this door. If you let me out, where can I find that little bitch? As she cried, she quickly tore up the check that added up to $1 million into pieces. Yi Lianxiu felt that her heart was also broken by her mother. She looked at the pieces on the ground for a long time before she smiled, although it hurt her heart. She didn't say anything, turned back, picked up her bag, and went to the door. Wang Kaiyun cried out of breath. Yi Lianxiu, where are you going? You unfilial daughter, don't you care about your mother? Yi Lianxiu's voice became a little lighter. Mom, I'm going to beg that little bitch. Wang Kaiyun chased after her, grabbed her arm, and softened her voice. Lianxiu, does your face hurt? Did mommy hurt you? Yi Lianxiu suddenly turned back. She looked at her mother's face, and her pupils contracted violently. Chapter 12:07. Yi Lianxiu looked at it and suddenly turned around. She picked up the pieces of the 2 checks and put them in her pocket. Wang Kaiyun had been following her, begging her to save Yi Sun. Yi Lianxiu walked out and closed the door. Her back was against the door. Just now, she knew that the person she wanted to save was not just Yi Sun, but her mother. Her mother had gone mad. She had gone mad because of Yi Sun's matter. For the first time, she was willing to take a taxi to the Su family's villa. It was already evening, and the sky was dyed red by the sunset glow. Yi Lianxiu stood in front of the Su family's house, looking at a black sports car in the courtyard. She recognized the license plate. The Su family's housekeeper came out to tell her that Miss had asked her to wait. Yi Lianxiu had been waiting outside from 6:30 to 9 o'clock. She stood in the strong evening wind, straight and tall. Her white dress fluttered in the wind, making her stand out in the dark. Inside the Su family's mansion, Qin Anlin and Mr. Su finished their discussion and came out. Seeing Su Qing standing by the window, he smiled faintly. Cheng, why are you standing here? Su Qing smiled sweetly at him and held his hand. Anlin Gu, it's nothing. Are you done talking to Dad? Qin Anlin nodded. I'm done. I have to go back now. See you next time. Su Qing pouted. Anlin Gu, it's rare for you to come over. Please. Silly, you still have school tomorrow. He ruffled her hair and went downstairs. He started the car and slowly drove out of the Su family's mansion. But at the door, he seemed to see a familiar figure. Qin Anlin instinctively narrowed his eyes. He zoomed in and saw that it was Yi Liangxiu. But he did not stop the car and drove away quickly. The headlights stung Yi Liangxiu's eyes. She turned around to avoid it. When she turned back, the car had already slowly driven away. Su Cheng walked out in a pure dress with her princess hair. She was in a completely different world from Yi Liangxiu's current sorry state. With her hands behind her back, Su Cheng looked at Yi Liangxiu, tilted her head, and smiled gently. Sister Liangxiu, are you here for Yi Sun's? Of course, Yi Liangxiu was not stupid enough to think that begging her would work. She pursed her lips and said calmly, how can I let Yi Sun go? Su Cheng's face immediately made the appearance of a little white rabbit, looking very scared. She smiled softly and said, Sister Liangxiu, you shouldn't say that. I really like Yi Sun, but he is still young. I don't want to be tied down so early. But Yi Sun can't wait. He covets our family's assets and thinks that he can do anything to me just by having sex with me. Sister Liangxiu, he wants to rape me, so of course I have to scream. I was so scared at that time. Yi Sun is like a beast, wanting to tear my clothes off. Su Cheng put on a good performance. After saying that, she smiled evilly. Sister Liangxiu, I know you always knew that I was just playing with Yi Sun. I just want to know under what circumstances such an obedient man would turn into a beast and be willing to take off his clothes. Yi Liangxiu listened to the girl in front of her say such words. She felt deeply sorry for Yi Sun. Yi Sun liked such a superficial and vicious girl. Out of love, he had thought that Su Cheng was a pure and innocent girl. However, just as he had thought that they were in love, Su Cheng had seduced him and then sued him for attempted rape. Chapter 1208. Yi Liangxiu looked at Su Cheng in front of her. What do you want? Do you want me to kneel down and beg you? Su Cheng chuckled and played with her fingers. Sister Liangxiu, aren't you curious why I'm toying with Yi Sun? Yi Liangxiu did not say anything. Su Cheng's expression was subtle and her voice turned cold. Because Sister Liangxiu was too popular in school. Hence, the little princess of the Su family was unhappy. Ever since she was young, she had always been the favorite and was the center of attention. However, when she entered high school, she found out that Yi Liangxiu was the dream lover of all the boys in school. How could this be? Hence, Yi Sun became the scapegoat. Yi Liangxiu looked down. Have you never liked Yi Sun? No. Su Cheng raised her head proudly. People like you don't even deserve to carry my shoes. She turned around and walked through the black carved door. Her voice was cold and incongruous with her appearance. He's going to jail for sure. If there's anyone to blame, it's you, Sister Liangxiu. No one else can be blamed. Yi Liangxiu stood there. She had found the answer. It was so ridiculous. Everything came from the little princess's displeasure. Hence, she sent a young man to jail. What kind of logic was this? Yi Liangxiu stood in the wind for a long time before she slowly walked back. She walked very slowly, and every step was painful. Yi Sun had been locked up for half a month. Her mother might need a huge sum of money to be hospitalized. She only had one way out. After walking for 100 meters, a black sports car drove over in front of him. The headlights of the car were very dazzling. She covered her eyes instinctively. The car turned around 5 meters in front of her and stopped. The door of the front passenger seat opened, and a deep male voice rang out. Get in. Yi Liangxiu pursed her lips and looked at Qin Anlin in the car without moving. He lit a cigarette and said in a gloomy voice, My patience is limited. Only then did she open the door and get into the car. The high-performance sports car sped on the road. Her breathing was a little messy, and she didn't dare to look at him. Half an hour later, the car stopped in front of King Entertainment's building. His voice was cold. Get out. Yi Liangxiu turned her head and looked at him. Qin Anlin got out of the car, slammed the door, and walked toward the building. He was sure that she would follow him up. Yi Liangxiu got out of the car and silently followed behind him all the way into the elevator to his office. The fact that he chose to discuss this matter in his office made his position clear. Yi Liangxiu walked into his office. Qin Anlin's tone was a little indifferent. Close the door. She closed the door in a daze. Qin Amlin's gaze landed on her face. You already knew that I knew the Su family, didn't you? On the road just now, he had called Khan to investigate when he was alone. Only then did he find out about the feud between Yi Liangxiu and the Su family. Now that he thought about it, her entering King Entertainment and even dedicating herself to him were all premeditated. Qin Amlin had been through a lot, but he had never thought that he would fall into the hands of a little girl. He pinched her chin and said in a cold voice, "Where's the video?" Yi Liangxiu wasn't surprised that he could figure it out so quickly. She took out her phone and placed it in his hand. "Did you back it up?" Qin Amlin took it, unlocked it, and opened the video. His eyes became colder. "The angle is not bad. Yi Liangxiu, you have guts." Chapter 1209. If I don't save your brother, are you going to publicize this? He returned her phone to her, his tone still calm. Yi Liangxiu mustered her courage and said, "Yes." Qin Amlin narrowed his eyes and then chuckled. "Do you think I'm afraid?" President Qin is not afraid. But once this video is released, the public will think that the female lead is Mo Xiaoqi. Yi Liangxiu stretched out her hand. There was a burn on her left wrist. All of Mo Xiaoqi's fans knew that Mo Xiaoqi's hand had been injured during filming. At that moment, Yi Liangxiu had the same burn on her wrist. But compared to Mo Xiaoqi's, one was new while the other was old. But how could they tell from the video? Qin Amlin did not care about Mo Xiaoqi's injury, but he hated being tied to Mo Xiaoqi in front of the media. There was no doubt that he was furious. The girl in front of him looked cold, but the things she did were enough to make him look at her in a different light. She was really capable. Not even 10 Mo Xiaoqis could think of these methods. Qin Amlin's eyes were filled with coldness. There are two things I hate the most. The first is being schemed against by others, and the second is being threatened. And she had both of these things. Yi Liangxiu closed her eyes and said softly, "I know." His eyes fell on her swollen face, and he suddenly let go of her. He took a step back, his expression cold, as if he had made a decision. "I will have the Su family withdraw their lawsuit, but don't let me see that video. Otherwise, you won't even know how you died." Tears trickled down her face. Yes, she had never been so humble before. But for Yi Sun, she was willing. Qin Amlin sat behind his desk and dialed a number with his landline phone. Then he took a long drag on his cigarette. After a long time, the call connected and he said, "President Su, there is something I need to trouble you with." After a long conversation, Qin Amlin smiled faintly and said, "Little girls are always a bit naughty. It's fine, I'll just have to coax Cheng later. Yes, she's my girlfriend. She's crying in front of me. I can't do anything about it." Yi Liangxiu's body stiffened as she looked at him. As he spoke, his gaze fell on her face. It was a little cold and unfamiliar. Yi Liangxiu's body trembled slightly. Finally, he hung up the phone and looked at her. "Yi Sun will be released tonight." "Thank you," she whispered. Qin Amlin looked at her. "But you will pay for this." She looked at him. "You know that Yi Sun is innocent." "Yes, but what does that have to do with me?" He looked at her coldly. "What does it have to do with me? What you have done to me?" Yi Liangxiu took out 2 pieces of the check from her pocket and placed them on his desk. Her face was swollen and her body trembled slightly. "You slept with me once, so you helped me once. It's very fair." This was the first time someone had dared to talk about fairness in front of him. The word fairness was never in Qin Amlin's dictionary because it was ridiculous. He narrowed his long and narrow eyes, and after a moment, he said coldly, "Get out." He didn't announce the result to her, but Yi Liangxiu knew that it would be difficult for her to move forward in King Entertainment. Ing Jie had warned her. She didn't regret it. She walked out of his office and out of the skyscraper of King Entertainment. Perhaps she would have to say goodbye. Chapter 1210. It was hard to wait for the late bus. She waited for 10 minutes, but it was Qin Amlin's black sports car that arrived. It did not stop when it passed her, and it was very fast. Yi Liangxiu's eyes were a little watery. She watched as the car drove away, and her legs felt a little weak. She reached out and held onto the road sign. It was then that she felt afraid, after a long time, The Route 11 bus finally arrived. It took her an hour to get back to her home on Hepping Road. Yi-sun had already arrived before her. When she opened the door, her mother, Wang Kaiyun, was hugging Yi-sun and stroking her son's face over and over again happily, as though she had lost him and found him again. When she saw that Yi Liangxiu had returned, she merely said faintly, "You're back." With that said, she stroked her son again, unwilling to let go. Yi-sun asked, "Sis, what happened to your face?" Yi Liangxiu smiled faintly. "Nothing. It's good that you're back." Yi-sun wanted to say something, but stopped. At this moment, Wang Kaiyun held her son's arm and said warmly, "Mom made your favorite braised pork ribs. I've been waiting for you to come back. Go wash your hands and eat it." "Sis, you haven't eaten either, right?" Yi-sun looked at his sister and called out softly, "I'm not hungry. I'll go take a shower first." Yi Liangxiu forced a smile and took her clothes into the bathroom. Yi-sun's gaze was a little sad. He knew that it was because of his sister that he was able to come out. His mother only knew how to spoil him and nothing else. He felt very guilty, but there was nothing else he could do. After waiting for his mother to fall asleep, he walked into Yi Liangxiu's bedroom. It was a small room of about 6 square meters. Compared to his 12 square meters, it was really too cramped. "Sis, are you asleep?" Yi-sun sat by the bed and asked softly. Yi Liangxiu's voice was a little low. "Is the door closed?" Yi-sun nodded. Yi Liangxiu gently sat up and reached out to touch Yi-sun's face. After a while, she said softly, "Yi-sun, we have to sell the house, because she might lose her job because her mother needed treatment." Yi-sun's eyes widened as he stared at her. "Mom is sick. She needs treatment." Yi Liangxiu said softly, "This house can probably be sold for more than $1 million. We can rent a house and save the extra money for Mom's treatment. When Big Sister has the money, she can pay the down payment. By then, we will have a home again." As Yi Liangxiu spoke, she rested her head on Yi-sun's shoulder. "Yi-sun, are you tired?" Without a home, she would be even more tired. Yi-sun didn't say a word. He remembered that when they were young, his mother had an episode of illness. It had been a long time, and they had almost forgotten that she was sick. She had always been sick. Tilting his head, he looked at Yi Liangxiu, who was only a year older than him. He nodded slightly and said, "Okay." Yi Liangxiu forced a smile and rested her head on his shoulder again. "Yi-sun, don't leave me again, okay? I don't know where to find you next time, and I don't know if I can find you again. Yi-sun, I don't know what else I can exchange for next time." The next day, she put up the house with the agent. Yi-sun was on vacation, so he stayed at home to take care of Wang Kaiyun. Yi Liangxiu went to King Entertainment as usual. She didn't say anything to anyone, including Ying Jie. She just went to the training class as usual. Chapter 12:11. After whispering a few words, Ying Jie scolded, "Does President Qin think this is a game? He can support and throw her away as he pleases." Kaim hurriedly said a few more words, and Ying Jie finally calmed down. She turned to look at Yi Liangxiu and pursed her lips. This little girl is quite bold. She even dares to have designs on President Qin. Kaim sighed as well. That was why this was so difficult. "How about this, Ying Jie? You wait and see. Maybe President Qin will change his mind later." Kaim thought for a moment and said, "Actually, even if he didn't say it, Ying Jie knew that if something like this happened in the past, President Qin would have kicked the person out long ago. But this time he didn't. He just kept the person in the cold storage. Who knew what President Qin would do next?" After Kaim left, Ying Jie had mixed feelings. She looked at Yi Liangxiu inside and sighed. This girl was very talented. She had beautiful features and was suitable for the big screen. But this time, she had angered President Qin. She might not have a chance. Ying Jie was kind to Yi Liangxiu. She called her out and asked in a low voice, "President Qin is very angry. Are you sure you want to stay?" Yi Liangxiu looked at Ying Jie and nodded firmly. Not because she liked him, not because she was ambitious, but because she had no other choice. Yi Liangxiu was removed from the trainees and became a girl who did odd jobs at King Entertainment. She swept the floor, poured tea, did everything. And because of Mo Xiaoqi's overt and covert exclusion, her life became even more difficult. Jie happened to be in England on a business trip and couldn't take care of her. Even if she could, Jie couldn't be too biased. After all, it was President Qin who wanted to torture her. The manager of the logistics department had a good relationship with Mo Xiaoqi. He assigned all the dirty work to Yi Liangqiu. She was very, very tired during that period of time. She was also busy selling her house, selling it for 1.5 million. Her mother's condition had stabilized due to timely treatment and Yi Sun's safe return. This was a comfort to Yi Liangqiu. Her days at King Entertainment were tough, but for the sake of the 4,000 yuan salary, she gritted her teeth and continued. At this time, she was no longer the most promising campus belle of Beihai, and she was no longer the Yi Liangqiu who only knew how to write and write. She needed to make a living, and she needed to support her family. Her dreams had disappeared when she entered King Entertainment. She did not give up. She remembered what Jie had said. Yi Liangqiu squatted down in the corridor of King Entertainment, trying her best to wipe the floor. She seemed to get tired easily these days, and her waist would ache after squatting for a while. A pair of exquisite red leather shoes appeared in front of her. She looked up and saw Mo Xiaoqi and a row of interns standing behind Mo Xiaoqi. Mo Xiaoqi placed her feet in front of Yi Liangqiu and raised her chin. I was wondering who it was. Turns out it's King Entertainment star. Oh yeah, Yi Liangqiu. Why are you wiping the floor here? Yi Liangqiu ignored her and continued to wipe the floor. But how could Mo Xiaoqi let her off? She sneered and stepped on a rag with her high heels. Help me wipe my shoes. Yi Liangqiu stood up slowly. She looked at Mo Xiaoqi and said slowly, Miss Mo, I'm not serving you alone. Listen, you sound very virtuous. Mo Xiaoqi chuckled. Do you still think you're the Yi Liangqiu of the past? Let me tell you, if President Qin wants someone to be famous, then they'll be famous. If you want someone to be buried forever, you won't be able to do anything, no matter how capable you are. Chapter 12:12. The sarcasm in her words infuriated Mo Xiaoqi. She raised her hand and was about to slap her again when a voice reprimanded her. What's going on? When did King allow you to hit someone in the company? It was Jie. Next to her was Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin seemed to be discussing something with Jie. Jie walked him out of the office. Mo Xiaoqi immediately pretended to be obedient and said, Jie, I just wanted to teach the disobedient newcomer a lesson. Who asked her to disrespect me? If you change your temper, your career will probably improve a lot. Jie glanced at her and then at Yi Liangqiu. Get on with your work. She sighed in her heart. Such a good girl had ruined her future. When she turned back, she saw that Qin Anlin had already walked towards the elevator. Mo Xiaoqi flicked her sleeves and left reluctantly. Those interns didn't dare to do that. They were all counting on Jie to promote them. Jie looked at them one by one and said sternly, Go and do 1,000 squats. She couldn't stand internal strife in the company. Would they become famous if they defeated their own people? After everyone left, Jie looked at Yi Liangqiu and said in a gentler voice, Get up, come to my office. Yi Liangqiu put down the things in her hands and followed Jie in. As soon as they entered, Jie got angry. Yi Liangqiu, did you come to King Entertainment to get 4,000 yuan and just to sweep the floor? No. Yi Liangqiu pursed her lips. Jie continued to fire. Did you see President Qin's attitude? He doesn't care. President Qin has always hated Mo Xiaoqi's behavior, but he didn't intervene today. Do you know what that means? Yi Liangqiu finally looked up at Jie. Jie said very slowly, It's President Qin who is suppressing you, not someone else. Although it was cruel, it was the truth. Yi Liangqiu looked a little worried. Jie looked at her and felt bad for her. She said mildly, I'll talk to President Qin. Get to work. Yi Liangqiu thanked him and walked out. Jie didn't manage to convince Qin Anlin. Yi Liangqiu still spent her time cleaning and sending and receiving documents before Qin Anlin could unseal her. Fate had played a big joke on her. Yi Sun committed suicide. He jumped from the 8th floor of the school, ending his young life. When Yi Liangqiu rushed to the school, Her legs were weak. Yi Sun's face was covered by a white cloth, and he was lying upright. She walked over slowly, wanting to call his name and wake him up, but when she opened her mouth, she could only speak in a hoarse voice. She couldn't say a word. Yi Sun was so young, innocent, and beautiful. She slowly knelt beside Yi Sun. Her fingers were trembling as she lifted the white cloth on his face. Yi Sun seemed to be alive, except that he was asleep. Yi Lianqiu's fingers touched his face gently. It was cold. She remembered that Yi Sun's body had always been warm, especially from the ground. She often hugged him to keep warm in the winter. Yi Sun. A stream of blood slowly seeped out from the back of his head, staining her eyes red. Yi Sun. Yi Lianqiu closed her eyes and knelt on the ground, crying silently. At this moment, it was as if she had returned to the day their father passed away. She was helpless and didn't know what to do. Yi Sheng held her hand and told her to take good care of her mother and Yi Sun. Chapter 12-13. Yi Lianqiu cried silently. It was quiet all around, and no one dared to step forward. In such silence, Yi Lianqiu let out a mournful cry, Yi Sun, but he could no longer stand up and call her sister. Someone started to pull her back and comfort her. But how could she? Her mother had gone crazy and Yi Sun was dead. Her only hope was Yi Sun. Yi Sun could no longer come back to life. Even if they lost their home, Yi Sun couldn't find a place to go home, even if he wanted to. Yi Lianqiu had experienced the saddest day of her life. She didn't know how she sent Yi Sun off, but someone kept pulling her back. When she went to the school to deal with Yi Sun's funeral, the school gave a vague explanation, saying that it was because of Yi Sun's personal feelings and that it had nothing to do with the school. Yi Lianqiu sat opposite the principal. She used to be Wang Zhao's most admired female student, but now she was the parent of the victim. Lianqiu, I understand how you feel, but I have my difficulties too. Wang Xiao hinted. Our teachers are also very sad that something happened to Yi Sun. He was such an outstanding student. Wang Xiao continued. There are some things that we are not clear about and are still investigating. But I think as Yi Sun's sister, you should know more about his private life than us. Yi Lianqiu looked straight at Wang Xiao. Wang Xiao squeezed out a bitter smile. That's what happened. I can only say that Yi Sun's psychological quality is a little poor. Gossip is a fearful thing, and it can kill. Yi Lianqiu looked straight at Wang Xiao and said softly, it was Su Cheng who spread the rumor that Yi Sun wanted to rape her, right? Wang Xiao didn't say anything but sighed. The answer was obvious. However, out of appreciation for Yi Lianqiu, Wang Xiao kindly reminded her, Lianqiu, if you go head-on with this matter, not only will you not be able to find any evidence against Su Cheng, but you will also be pushing yourself into the fire. He looked at Yi Lianqiu with a burning gaze. Lianqiu, you know what I mean, right? The arm is no match for the thigh. Yi Lianqiu looked at Wang Xiao. After a long time, she said softly, I understand. How could she not understand? She had nothing. What could she use to sue Su Cheng? What should he sue Su Cheng about? However, Yi Sun was indeed killed by Su Cheng's rumors. She wouldn't let it go. Yi Lianqiu's eyes were as cold as ice. She wouldn't let it go, but she would wait for the day when she had the ability to seek justice for Yi Sun. Out of humanity, the school compensated Yi Sun's death with 500,000 yuan. Yi Lianqiu didn't refuse. She took the money and took out the remaining money, begging the buyer to sell the house to her. She sold it for 1.5 million yuan and spent 2 million yuan to buy it back. She owed the bank hundreds of thousands of yuan. On the day when she got the house, she took Yi Sun's photo home. He died at such a young age. After his death, he had to have a home to return to. Yi Lianqiu looked at Yi Sun's photo and stood there for a long time. At night, she took out her mobile phone and looked at the video. She knew clearly that she needed fame. She needed money. She needed power. And only Qin Anlin could give her these. But after so long, maybe Qin Anlin had forgotten who she was. The only thing they had in common was that sex incident. Chapter 12-14. Yi Liangxiu closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was fearless. She quickly logged into a website and gently pressed the send button. The video was sent out. Almost immediately, the video went viral. Although the public didn't know the male lead, Mo Xiaoqi's fans knew every inch of their idol's glory. And Mo Xiaoqi's main image was that of a pure and innocent girl. So in just one night, Mo Xiaoqi's fans had taken over Mo Xiaoqi's social media account. They were all scolding her for being a green tea. The impact spread further. Like sharks smelling blood, the reporters flocked to King Entertainment in the middle of the night. Especially Mo Xiaoqi, who was still filming late at night, was inexplicably surrounded. She was so aggrieved that she cried. In the end, her manager found a way to get her out. Sitting in the car, Mo Xiaoqi exploded. Who did this? Although she had longed to hook up with President Qin, she had long since given up hope after all these years. The person who sent the video is so sinister, Mo Xiaoqi said hatefully. President Qin must think I did it. She looked at her manager with a slightly panicked expression. Do I need to explain to President Qin or hold a press conference to clarify things? Her manager was a middle-aged man in his 40s. He was very thin, and his name was Liang Quan. He comforted her gently. The point is this woman you? If not, wouldn't you be asking for trouble by holding a press conference yourself? Mo Xiaoqi only took a few glances before saying with certainty, Of course it's not me. Liang Quan smiled. Then let's see how President Qin handles it. What I mean is, bide your time. As for who this woman was, President Qin should know best. With tears in her eyes, Mo Xiaoqi looked at Liang Quan, pursed her lips, and nodded. At King Entertainment's headquarters, all the employees were urgently recalled because the video posted on a certain social media site this afternoon was a huge scandal for King Entertainment. The arrow pointed to the unspoken rules within King Entertainment. Kam stood at the door of Qin Anlin's office, almost scared out of her wits. President Qin had lost his temper. Kam wanted to ask if it was Mo Xiaoqi, but she didn't dare to. She just stood at the door, trembling. Qin Anlin sat before his desk and took a deep drag on his cigarette. Then he glanced at Kam, calling Jie and asked Yi Liangxiu to come over. Kam was obviously stunned. Yi Liangxiu? President Qin meant that the woman was Yi Liangxiu? This was simply shocking. Isn't Yi Liangxiu pitiful enough? How dare he provoke President Qin? How much courage did he have? After recovering from his shock, Kam immediately went to do it. Jie called Yi Liangxiu right in front of him, but her phone was turned off. Jie looked at Kam. His phone is turned off. There's nothing we can do. Let's contact him tomorrow. Kam whined incessantly. Sis, I'm begging you, let this little lady come back quickly. Jie looked at him and said mildly, Yi Liangxiu hasn't come to work for more than 10 days. Kam was stunned. What's going on? Don't tell me she can't take it anymore? Jie's expression turned serious and she said softly, Yi Liangxiu's brother, Yi Sun, committed suicide. Even Kam was stunned. How could this be? Jie smiled. Kam, you've been with President Qin for so long, but you can't even handle President Qin like a little girl. Kam laughed bitterly. He agreed with Jie's words. Chapter 12:15. Back in the CEO's office on the top floor, Kam's voice was trembling. Yi Liangxiu turned off her phone. With that, he looked at President Qin as he extinguished the cigarette in his hand. Based on his understanding of President Qin, he would definitely start a massacre. Kam said instinctively, President Qin, something happened to Yi Liangxiu's family. Her brother jumped to his death. Qin Anlin's body trembled. He looked up at Kam for a few seconds. Kam knew that if he offended President Qin now, he would probably have to pack up and leave. But he still braced himself and said, President Qin, can you let her off the hook? Qin Anlin's gaze fell on Kam's face for a long time. She looked at him for a long time before she said softly, Give him a way out? If she does this, not only will she destroy Mo Xiaoqi, but she will also cause irreparable harm to King Entertainment. Qin Anlin laughed coldly. Also, Kam, go downstairs and see how many reporters are surrounding King Entertainment. Of course, Kime knew, so he didn't have much confidence when he pleaded. Qin Amlin lit another cigarette. Tell her to come see me. If I don't see her tonight, I'll settle it my own way. Kime immediately walked out. I'll definitely get her back. But as soon as Kime opened the door, he saw Yi Liangxiu standing outside. The lights in the office shone on the corridor outside, casting a smooth profile on her face. It was beautiful, but it made her look even paler. Qin Amlin had always felt that she was suited for the big screen. He hadn't been sure of her acting skills, but after this incident, he had a new understanding of Yi Liangxiu. At 19 years old, she was at least 30 years old. He thought that he hated it. He hated it when women played mind games with him, but at the same time he admired it. He squinted at her pale little face and said calmly, "Come, go out. I have something to discuss with Miss Yi." Kime backed out of the room and signaled for Yi Liangxiu to go in. Then, he closed the door. In the spacious office, there were only Yi Liangxiu and Qin Amlin. He didn't say anything, and the room was so quiet that only her rapid breathing could be heard. Qin Amlin looked at her. He sat on the sofa and said sternly, "Miss Yi, what do you want this time?" Yi Liangxiu pressed her back against the door tightly. After a long time, she said softly, "I want the opportunity that King Entertainment has put in the best possible effort." After she finished speaking, Qin Amlin stared at her intently. After a long time, he slowly stood up and walked towards her. She instinctively moved to the side, but he moved faster, trapping her between him and the door. With one hand on her shoulder and the other holding her chin, he looked at her deeply. "Why did you do this?" He laughed coldly. "It can't be because of Mo Xiaoqi." He moved closer to her, his voice a little cold. "Because of Su Qing? HM." He was too shrewd and she couldn't hide anything from him, so she just admitted it. She lifted her little face and smiled lightly. "Yes. So, you killed two birds with one stone and made a joke out of my King Entertainment, His voice rang beside her ear. It was very gentle, but there was a trace of shivering in it. Yi Liangxiu slowly opened her eyes. She turned her head and looked at him. "What does President Qin think?" His fingers gently stroked her delicate little face, and he smiled coldly. "Don't tell me you don't know that the Su family and I are family friends?" "I know." She didn't avoid his gaze. Chapter 12:16. Their lips were very close, so close that they could almost see each other's eyes. He stared into her eyes. "Why did you provoke me when you knew?" "Because I had no other choice." Her beautiful eyes were too dazzling at this moment. They were intertwined with hatred. She was like an avenging angel. If her gaze was placed on the big screen, it would be enough to shock millions of people. At the same time, this pair of eyes convinced Qin Amlin. He was a businessman. He would only do what was beneficial to him. Suddenly, he let go of her and took 2 steps back. Yi Liangxiu immediately reached behind her to support herself against the door. Otherwise, she would slip and fall. Qin Amlin pulled her over and called Kime over. "Help me contact the media downstairs. I want to hold a press conference." Kime looked at him holding Yi Liangxiu and was already shocked. Then he heard Qin Amlin's calm voice. "I want to make my relationship with Yi Liangxiu public." Relationship? Kime looked for his jaw. Was President Qin joking? How could this relationship be disclosed so casually? Moreover, the fact that President Qin had given in was enough to show that Yi Liangxiu was valuable enough to be used. But President Qin had tied her to him. Wouldn't it be troublesome in the future? But Kime couldn't resist. He nodded and said, "I'll make the arrangements immediately." After Kime left, Qin Amlin lowered his head. His gaze was gentle, but his voice was cold. "In a while, just do as I say. Yi Liangxiu, if you dare to cause trouble again, I guarantee that you will regret it." She pursed her lips and didn't speak. Her stubbornness made him unhappy. But Qin Amlin had never thought about what would happen next. They were partners and enemies, so he instinctively didn't like her personality. Later on, he met Pei Chi and was deeply attracted to her. For the past few years, he had never thought that Pei Chi was actually the other side of Yi Liangxiu. It was the Yi Liangxiu that he wanted to like, but was unwilling to like. After he finished speaking, he took the lead and walked out. His voice was very calm. To the conference room. Yi Lianxiu ran a few steps to catch up with him, her small hand holding his big hand. Qin Anlin's footsteps paused. He turned his head and looked at her small hand with a complicated expression. Yi Lianxiu raised her head and smiled. Anlin, let's go. However, he did not move. After a while, he said, Pay attention to your eyes. There is no love in your eyes, only fear. She was stunned for a moment, but he had already walked forward. His large palms closed, and he slowly held her hand. He walked in front, and she followed. Yi Lianxiu was very tall at 172 centimeters, but behind Qin Anlin, who was 186 centimeters tall, she walked like a little bird. Kime had already arranged for the reporters to be seated. Even though it was late at night, there were still more than 20 mainstream media outlets attending the conference. From this, it could be seen that Yi Lianxiu had cast a huge stone. Qin Anlin walked in holding Yi Lianxiu's hand. He stood at the head of the table, and his posture was indifferent. However, when he looked at Yi Lianxiu, his gaze was as gentle as water and full of love. Kime, who was at the side, secretly wiped her tears. Their President Qin's acting was the real deal. If President Qin went into acting, those little fresh meats would not be able to stand a chance. Look at his gaze, his body movements. It was full of acting. Qin Anlin helped Yi Lianxiu onto the stage, took the microphone, and looked at her dotingly. He then said, I believe that the video between me and Lianxiu tonight has caused a lot of trouble for everyone. Here, I would like to apologize to the public. Because of my carelessness, the video was leaked. Of course, I would also like to apologize to my Lianxiu for not protecting you well. He leaned over and kissed her lightly on the lips. Chapter 12:17. Qin Anlin only kissed her lightly before leaving her lips, but his gaze was gentle. In that instant, Yi Lianxiu's heart trembled. He didn't say much. He just caressed her cheek with his palm. Everything was said without words. Anyone who doubted their relationship would have their doubts dispelled. No one would doubt that such a gaze didn't come from the eyes of someone in love. Yes, that's it. Qin Anlin leaned against her ear, his voice low and husky. Then, he put his arm around her shoulder and said calmly, Do you have any more questions? A reporter asked sharply, President Qin, I heard that Ms. Yi is an artiste from King Entertainment. What I would like to ask is, did she become your girlfriend first or the company's artiste first? Qin Anlin smiled. Is this important? The reporter instinctively said, Very important. Qin Anlin smiled faintly. This is not important to me at all. Lianxiu is a very talented girl. I hope to help her. The last sentence was very important. The reporters had been in this industry for a long time. President Qin's words were very meaningful. It seemed that Yi Lianxiu would be the newcomer that King Entertainment was promoting. Looking closely, she was indeed special. She didn't have the sweetness of Asia's Mo Xiaoqi, but the charm. Given time, she would definitely shine. Qin Anlin's voice was very serious. Ms. Yi and I are in a proper relationship. Please be careful when you write. If there is any false content, King Entertainment will pursue legal responsibility. His gaze turned gentle when he looked at Yi Lianxiu. She's a good girl. I want to treat her well. I want to give her the best. The reporter had originally come to catch up on the news. Now that he was fed a mouthful of dog food, he was caught off guard. However, it was the entertainment industry. Who knew what would happen in the future? But the headline in front of them could be written that the head of King Entertainment had found the right girl. A sparrow had turned into a phoenix. Yi Lianxiu stood beside Qin Anlin. She was dressed in plain clothes, but she didn't look timid at all. She had her own proud temperament. The reception ended quickly. Khan treated everyone to a late-night snack and politely sent them off. When he arrived at President Qin's office, he still didn't dare to enter. He turned around and saw Ingjie. You should avoid it, Kime advised. Ingjie nodded and followed Kime to Kime's office. In the president's office, Qin Anlin held a new document in one hand and a cigarette in the other. There was a cold look on his handsome face. After reading the document, he pushed it in front of Yi Lianxiu, who was sitting opposite him. See if there are any problems. If there aren't, then sign it. Yi Lianxiu took it and read it carefully. 10 years was as long as a contract to sell one's body. She looked up, and her gaze was fixed on Qin Anlin's face. She only paused for 2 seconds before lowering her head and signing the document. Qin Anlin pressed her hand, his voice a little hoarse. "Are you sure you want to sign it?" The back of his hand was warm, but her fingers were cold. Her hand trembled when she felt the cold and the warmth. She looked up again and met his eyes. Qin Anlin felt that he had never seen such a determined gaze. He didn't know why, but his heart softened a little. "Yi Lianxiu, have you thought it through? If you sign this, it means that you will spend the best years of your life at King Entertainment, no matter if it's good or bad." Chapter 12:18. He suddenly felt a little depressed. He extinguished the cigarette butt and lit another one. He looked at her impassively and said, "Okay." He put away the documents and looked at her deeply. Then he pressed the intercom. Come in with Ing Jie." Kam came in a minute. She looked at Qin Anlin with a burning gaze. Ing Jie was much calmer. "Start training her tomorrow. Report to my office from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. every day." Qin Anlin's voice was impassive. Kam was in disbelief. President Qin didn't pursue the matter with Yi Lianxiu. How big of a mess would that be? But Qin Anlin really didn't pursue the matter. He just raised his hand and gestured for them to leave. After they left, Qin Anlin sat alone in his office. His surroundings were peaceful. He felt a little lonely. That loneliness was close to invincibility and bordering on boredom. King Entertainment hadn't had any surprises for a long time. It was like his life. He used to love someone so passionately, but in the end, it was like fireworks disappearing without a trace. Qin Anlin was very lonely. Life was like stagnant water. So when Yi Lianxiu appeared, she was so unafraid of death. That piqued his interest. But it wasn't love between a man and a woman. He was more interested in making her into an iconic work. He sat there and smoked a few cigarettes. He didn't leave the office until 2 p.m. It was drizzling when he left. The black sports car was a little slow. He held the steering wheel with one hand and smoked with the other. It was late at night. There were no pedestrians on the road. Only the occasional car passed behind him. He drove slowly until he saw a familiar figure. It was Yi Lianxiu. Her face and body were covered in fine raindrops. She walked straight in the rain. Her face was pale. There wasn't even a trace of soul in her. She was as clean as a piece of white paper, but there was an unresolvable gloom in her bones. Qin Anlin looked at her and felt that she was like a mystery. He couldn't see through her. He could have driven over and ignored her, but in the end, he stopped the car beside her. The car window rolled down. He looked at her drenched body and said coldly, "Get in the car." Yi Lianxiu slowly tilted his head and then fell down just like that. He fell down softly, without any warning. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes and cursed under his breath. He opened the car door and got out immediately. He picked up the person on the ground and placed her in the car. Then he checked her forehead. Luckily, she didn't have a fever, but it was definitely not okay to wear wet clothes like this. Qin Anlin did not hesitate to tear off her clothes and remove everything. When she appeared so tender, the visual impact of black and white was so obvious. His breath was a little hot. He grabbed a blanket and covered her up in a flustered manner. When he sat in the driver's seat again, he put his hands on the steering wheel. Qin Anlin's gaze slowly looked down. He looked at his own desire and laughed at himself. When did his self-control become so bad? The car drove to his penthouse in the elite area of B City and parked in the underground garage. He took the exclusive elevator and carried her upstairs. She was only wrapped in a blanket. He carried her straight to the bed in the guest room and put her down. He wanted to go back to the room to take a shower, but his feet weren't steady. His body was on top of hers, and there was not a trace of it. Yi Lianxiu also woke up at this time. Chapter 12:19. Her feminine instincts told her that she was not wearing a single piece of clothing. Yi Lianxiu pursed her lips and instinctively slapped him. In the dark night, the sound of the slap was exceptionally clear. Qin Amlin's face was slapped to the side. Her breathing was a little erratic, and she struggled. "Let go of me." Qin Amlin pursed his thin lips and stared at her face maliciously. No woman had ever dared to treat him like this. Almost immediately, her hands were pressed down and raised high above her head. She was pinned to the ground. Qin Amlin narrowed his eyes and sneered. "Yi Liangxiu, do you think I need to force a woman's?" He restrained her with one hand and switched on the bedside lamp with the other under the bright light. She felt even more ashamed. He seemed to be deliberately humiliating her as he looked at her carefully under the light. She was breathtakingly beautiful in bed. If it wasn't for the fact that King had promoted her, Qin Amlin thought that he would have made love to her right then and there. Yi Lianxiu was embarrassed and angry. She stretched her leg out to kick him. However, when her foot touched him, Qin Amlin cursed and rolled to the side. It seemed that she had kicked a place that she shouldn't have. Yi Lianxiu knelt by the side and bit her lip. "Qin Amlin?" Her voice was a little fragile, and strangely, it hit his heart. Qin Amlin stretched out his hand and suddenly pulled her onto his body. Her lips were right on his. It was soft and warm. She looked at him, and her little hand was on his chest. She felt a little helpless. Compared to him, she was like a blank piece of paper, innocent and fragile. Qin Amlin kissed her wantonly, sucking on her little mouth and tasting every bit of her beauty. At this moment, he was moved, which was rare. The big palm could not help but throw the blanket aside. His fingers intertwined with hers as he worshipped her beauty bit by bit. Yi Lianxiu panted softly. Her long hair spread out hopelessly. Her fingers were clasped by him. If she struggled, she would send herself to him. The air was filled with the scent of hormones. She stopped struggling and lay down. She felt that she was being carried very, very high up in the sky, as if she could not come back down. She called his name uncomfortably, Qin Amlin. Qin Amlin's body trembled. Then he paused and looked down at the person in his arms. Her hair was wet and stuck to her little face, covering her bright and clean face. Her red lips were trembling slightly, constantly trembling. It was extremely alluring. She was Yi Lianxiu. It was no one else. Qin Amlin calmed down and finally let go of her. He lay down and said, "Go take a shower." Just now, they were one step away from having sex again. For Qin Amlin, it was against his principles. Both of them were embarrassed. For Qin Amlin, it was even more unacceptable that he could not control himself. For a long time, she did not move. He tilted his head and looked at her. After a long time, he got up quietly. He walked to the window and took out a cigarette from his pocket. He did not light it, but just put it in his mouth. His back looked a little lonely. Yi Lianxiu looked at him. She had never thought that a person like Qin Amlin would be lonely. Yi Lianxiu pursed her lips. She sat there and looked at him with her arms around her knees. She did not know that she was studying this man and analyzing him in her heart, and she did not know the reason. Chapter 12:20. She lay on her knees and smiled lightly. "Qin Amlin, don't you think you're being too superior?" He didn't find a smile in her eyes. He continued to look at her with a judgmental gaze. Yi Lianxiu looked down and said after a while, "I won't fall in love with anyone. That better be the case." His voice was cold as he walked towards the door. As he held the doorknob, his tone was indifferent. "Sleep early. Also, don't wander around. I'll get someone to prepare clothes for you tomorrow." Yi Lianxiu was still hugging herself. She didn't realize how seductive she looked at that moment. Qin Amlin walked out, leaving the room in darkness. Yi Lianxiu then collapsed. She wrapped herself in the bed sheet and looked at her surroundings. It was late at night. There was the sound of rain outside. The sound was even clearer after the lights were turned off. She didn't sleep. She just looked out of the window. "Yi Sun, I'm one step closer to success." Yes, her fainting was fake. Everything was fake. Only her pain and her hatred were real. She had to get Qin Amlin's attention in order to succeed. Otherwise, she might be trampled to death before she could succeed. She couldn't sleep. She kept her eyes open until 4 in the morning. In the end, she couldn't help but go to the bathroom attached to the guest room to wash up. There was a bathrobe in the bathroom. She put it on and walked out of the bedroom barefooted. The apartment was a large flat with an area of more than 200 square meters. The huge living room was about 100 square meters. Her fair feet stepped on the pure white wool carpet without making any sound. She walked in the dark, and the darkness was perfect for her state of mind. Suddenly, the lights in the living room turned on. Jean Amlin sat on the sofa in front of the French window. He was wearing a bathrobe with a loose collar, revealing his well-defined muscles. He held a glass of red wine and looked in her direction with a burning gaze. "I can't sleep." Yi Lianqiu tightened her legs and her toes squirmed uneasily. "President Qin, I'm going back to sleep." His gaze fell on the bathrobe she was wearing. After a while, he said indifferently, "If you can't sleep, come over and have a glass of red wine." Yi Lianqiu walked over slowly and sat opposite him, feeling a little uneasy. Qin Amlin took a cup for her and poured half a cup for her. "It's for sleeping." She took it but did not drink it. He smiled, raised his head, and drank the tea in his cup. After drinking, he chuckled and said, "What? Are you afraid that I will drug you?" Yi Lianqiu lowered her eyes and smiled lightly. Why would President Qin need it? She took a sip and then stopped drinking. Qin Amlin looked at her. She was so well-behaved that she looked like a little saint. He chuckled, then laid on his back, closed his eyes, and asked her a question. "Yi Lianqiu, if you had to choose, one is to be my wife, the other is to be an international movie queen. Which would you choose?" Yi Lianqiu pursed her lips. After a long while, she said softly, "If it's because of love, I would rather be Mrs. Qin." Her answer was obvious. Qin Amlin smiled and continued to pour himself a glass of wine. It was strange. He should have hated her. He should have pushed her to the bottom of King Entertainment and tortured her. But he did not. Instead, he allowed her to chat with him in his bathrobe. 19 years old. How young? Perhaps it was because she had endured too much and her stubbornness had moved him. Chapter 1221. Barefooted. Yi Lianqiu suddenly stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window behind him. She leaned against it and looked at the boundless night outside. She said in a low voice, "Qin Amlin, do you believe in fate?" "Why?" He laughed dryly, his voice a little bewitching. Yi Lianqiu's voice became even lower. "I didn't believe in it in the past, but now I'd rather believe in ghosts and gods." If that was the case, Yi Sun wouldn't have disappeared from this world. He would have left behind some of his spirit, even if it was just a wisp of his spirit. Otherwise, she would be too lonely in this world. Qin Amlin looked at the wine in his glass for a long time before replying. "Yi Lianqiu, I believe you're not the kind of person who believes in these things. If she did, she wouldn't have done all these things." She lifted her head and stood in front of his floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the bright moon outside. She started crying. She didn't believe in fate in the past, but Yi Sun's death made her understand that there was a kind of reincarnation that couldn't be avoided. Qin Amlin waited for a long time, but she didn't say anything. He stood up slowly and looked at her back view. Her thin shoulders were trembling. Was she crying? Qin Amlin thought of Keim's words and pursed his thin lips. He wasn't a soft-hearted person, but on a night like this, he was willing to comfort a sad young lady. Just take it as for the value of his merchandise. He stood behind her and brought her into his arms. Yi Lianqiu's body stiffened at first, and then she was lying on his shoulder. His body smelled refreshed after a shower, and it smelled good. She buried her face in his shoulder, and the warmth made her want to cry. "If you want to cry, I can lean on you." Qin Amlin's tone was light, but because it was light and because it was nighttime, it seemed especially gentle. Yi Lianqiu buried her face deeper. Perhaps it was because she had been lonely and hurt for too long, but she didn't reject this gentleness. Even though she knew it was dangerous, even though she knew it was like poison, she still reached out and hugged his waist tighter. Qin Amlin lowered his head and looked at the little black head in his arms. He reached out and rubbed her hair. "How can there be such a stubborn little fellow?" He admitted that he had been lonely for a long time, which was why he had taken in such a little thing and allowed her to walk into his world. When he rubbed her little head, Yuliancio was stunned for a moment. Then, she buried herself deeper in his arms. Then, he felt a hot and wet sensation in his chest. It was very uncomfortable. He let her cry. He stood at the top of the city, hugged her, and told her, Yuliancio, if you don't want to cry one day, then you have to stand higher than anyone else. Stand in a position where no one can hurt you. When he said this, he didn't expect that she would use the same words against him in the future, telling him that he couldn't do anything to her. But no matter what, at this moment, Yuliancio was still a girl who was strong on the outside but weak on the inside. Whatever she wanted, she had to go through Qin Anlin. So she dealt with him as if she was walking on thin ice. Even though she hated herself for being like this, she felt that she was repulsive. Yuliancio cried, but every drop of her tears was for herself. Qin Anlin's warmth could warm her body, but it couldn't warm her heart. After getting out of bed and washing himself, he put on a set of casual clothes and walked towards the living room. He was going to the kitchen to get a glass of milk to drink. He had never had the habit of eating breakfast, so when he saw a bowl of porridge and 2 side dishes on the small dining table, he was a little surprised, but he still sat down to eat. Qin Anlin had lived abroad for a long time, so he had almost forgotten about Chinese breakfast. At this time, the taste was surprisingly good. Unknowingly, he finished the porridge and ate most of the side dishes. Chapter 12:23. They stared at each other for a long time before he asked softly, "Is there any porridge left?" "Oh," she replied, then shook her head and raised the dishes in her hands. "But there's lunch." Qin Anlin pretended to reply nonchalantly and walked out of the small dining room. "You can cook then. I'll wait outside." Her culinary skills were absolutely amazing. Perhaps because he was used to eating sumptuous meals, the dishes and porridge tasted especially good. Yuliancio went into the kitchen quietly and quickly prepared 3 dishes and a soup. When she came over to ask him to eat, she was worried that he wouldn't be able to eat, but Qin Anlin ate 2 bowls of rice and finished all the dishes she made. Yuliancio ate quietly as she looked at his bowl. Wasn't he full? As she looked at him, he looked back at her because she was wearing his clothes. It was a pair of sports shorts and a light blue shirt. Because she was very tall, it was only slightly bigger. Not only was it not ugly, but it also accentuated her slender legs and slender waist. Qin Anlin had never let any woman try wearing his white shirt, but Yuliancio looked very good in it. It was pure and seductive. He smoked a cigarette and realized that he seemed to have injected too many emotions into the product that he shouldn't have. After smoking a cigarette, he said softly, "I'll send you back in a while." He didn't say much and went straight to the study to smoke. She was like a little wife or a little nanny as she cleaned and washed the dishes. Qin Anlin never knew what it was like to have a woman at home. He had never brought a woman home before, and Yuliancio was the first. After smoking 2 cigarettes in the study, she was already sitting upright and ready to leave. He didn't know why, but he frowned and didn't like it. When he went out, he was obviously in a bad mood. Even the hidden reporters didn't notice him. He turned the steering wheel and asked Yuliancio softly, "Why did you open the window?" "The air conditioner is blowing, and I'm a little dizzy," she said softly. After a pause, she continued, "President Qin, thank you." Their relationship seemed to have returned to being polite. Everything in the apartment was like an illusion. Qin Anlin just smiled and didn't say much. After driving her to Hepping Road, he would drive away. Yuliancio watched as the black sports car slowly drove away, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. They were still photographed. The next day, the headlines were Qin Anlin and Yuliancio. The reporters took photos of Yuliancio spending the night together in President Qin's luxurious apartment. Yuliancio wore President Qin's shirt when she went out. They were very close. Of course, Yuliancio knew that. She wasn't surprised. When she walked to King Entertainment, she couldn't help being whispered about. She knew in her heart that they were talking about her brilliant seduction methods and whatnot. She didn't care. She only needed to care about what Qin Anlin thought of her. Of course, Mo Xiaoqi was the most infuriated. Although there were people scolding her at the beginning of the video, after it was proven that it was Yi Liangxiu in the video, more people were mocking her for actually losing to a newcomer. How could Mo Xiaoqi take this lying down? In the changing room, Mo Xiaoqi blocked Yi Liangxiu's path. She glared at Yi Liangxiu and asked coldly, "You did it, didn't you?" Yi Liangxiu had changed into her dance outfit, and her voice was very calm. "What do you mean I did it?" Chapter 1224. Yi Liangqiu looked at her and chuckled after a long while. "Sister Mo, you might be overthinking it." Mo Xiaoqi raised her hand out of habit. This time, Yi Liangqiu reached out and grabbed her arm. Her expression was cold. "Yes, I did it. But did I specify that it was Mo Xiaoqi?" "Sister Mo, no one said anything. You were the one who did it." Mo Xiaoqi had very few people in King Entertainment who would stand up to her like this. She was furious and exasperated. Liang Quan, her manager, was outside and sighed slightly. Didn't this little ancestor see the headlines? Yi Liangqiu had already slept in President Qin's house. Even if their relationship was fake, it would become real sooner or later. Couldn't she just calm down a little? She wanted to be frozen after causing such a ruckus. Liang Quan lowered his voice. "Miss Yi is young. Don't lower yourself to her level." This was giving Mo Xiaoqi a way out. But Mo Xiaoqi was not satisfied. She wasn't smart enough to understand Liang Quan's good intentions. She continued to lash out at Yi Liangqiu. "Yi Liangqiu, you did it. Then don't be afraid to admit it in front of President Qin." "President Qin knows," Yi Liangqiu said coldly. Mo Xiaoqi was stunned. Then she mumbled, "That's absolutely impossible." She had been in King Entertainment for a few years. She knew a little about President Qin's style of doing things. He would never let Yi Liangqiu get away with it. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Mo Xiaoqi couldn't take this blow. She was in a daze for a long time. In the end, she was taken away by Liang Quan. Liang Quan looked deeply at Yi Liangqiu and left with Mo Xiaoqi. As soon as they left, Jie appeared. She frowned as she looked in the direction they left. Then, she said to Yi Liangqiu, "Your opponent was never Yi Liangqiu." Yi Liangqiu understood what Jie meant and nodded. "I'll be careful in the future." She understood immediately. Jie did not blame her too much. She's still considered popular now, so don't clash with her if you can. Mo Xiaoqi isn't scary, but the fans behind her are extremely scary. After saying that, he changed the topic. "Go train. From today onwards, I will train you alone. From body shape to etiquette to acting, there will be a special teacher to teach you." After saying that, Jie looked at Yi Liangqiu. "Recently, why do I feel that you have put on weight?" One had to know that apart from their innate beauty, female artists also had to maintain their figures. Therefore, Jie was a little harsh on this aspect. She could even tell that Yi Liangqiu had grown a lot. Yi Liangqiu was also stunned for a moment. Then, she looked at Jie and pursed her lips. "Jie, did I? Maybe I saw wrongly." Jie smiled. "Go. President Qin has to check it in the afternoon." Speaking of this, Jie couldn't help but look at Yi Liangqiu in a different light. Only Ruan Yin from a few years ago could make President Qin pay attention to her. Yi Liangqiu hummed an acknowledgement and practiced from morning to night. She was still practicing even when her legs were cramping. When Qin Anlin came in, he saw her sweating profusely. He frowned, and his heart skipped a beat. In fact, he had long known that interns in the company were tough, and he was used to it. But this was the first time he felt uncomfortable. He even had a feeling that Yi Liangqiu's talent was enough for her to not have to work so hard. Yi Liangqiu looked up and saw him. His footsteps came to a halt just like that, and he almost fell. Chapter 12:25. He danced extremely well, spinning her around and dancing, one after another, until she could no longer move. At the last movement, he tightened his arms, and she fell into his embrace. She gasped softly, but his gaze was locked on her as his lips curled into a faint smile. You danced well. His arms were holding her tightly, so she could only let him hug her. She could only let him tighten his arms. She could only look at his handsome face, and a part of her heart started to collapse. It was quietly falling into a trap that they didn't know about. She was like that, but wasn't he the same as well? Ingjie looked at them as well. Somehow, she felt that President Qin's gaze was a little different. In the end, he finally let go of her and said lightly, "Yi Liangxiu, go take a shower." What? She was stunned for a moment. Qin Anlin smiled. Go cook. He held the car keys in his hand as he said in a dignified manner, "My hourly helper is on leave, so you'll be making my meals for the time being." He had seen the headlines today, and it was written by her. He knew it with one look. Even if she liked to be caught in the news, he didn't mind at this moment. Qin Amlin did not realize that if someone else was scheming against him, would he be so forgiving? He seemed to be especially looking forward to her scheming, just like an adult watching what tricks a child would play in the next second. Yi Liangxiu nodded her head and went to take a shower. Ingjie crossed her arms in front of her chest and looked at her boss. Have you taken a liking to her? When she said liking, it didn't mean that she wanted to sleep with him, but that she liked him. Qin Amlin looked at Ingjie indifferently and said slowly, "It's not like you don't know about this industry. If she wasn't my girlfriend, what do you think she would face with her looks?" Of course, Ingjie knew about the unspoken rules. President Qin, haven't you also slept with young ladies before? You're acting so noble now. Also, President Qin, when have you ever felt sorry for your female artists being stalked? Ingjie didn't think much of it, but she showed a faint smile on her face. Thank you, President Qin. The corners of Qin Amlin's mouth slowly rose. She cooks well. Moreover, shouldn't she pay a price for using him? Just then, Yi Liangxiu came out. Qin Amlin naturally held her hand. Let's go. Yi Liangxiu gave Ingjie an expression, meaning that she would leave first. Ingjie stood still and shook her head. What was going on? She knew they were acting, but who were they acting for? The reporters were squatting downstairs. It was normal for a man and a woman to be attracted to each other since they were both in their prime age. It was understandable that Yi Liangxiu was young and inexperienced, so it was understandable that she couldn't figure it out. However, President Qin was an experienced man, so it was a little strange that he was so slow when it came to this kind of relationship. Ingjie coldly smoked a cigarette. She had a feeling that Liangxiu would definitely capture President Qin's heart. Qin Amlin didn't immediately return to his condominium with Yi Liangxiu. Instead, he took her to the supermarket. He was probably lonely for a long time and wanted someone to accompany him. He pushed the car with one hand and scrolled through the news on his phone with the other. Yi Liangxiu focused on picking vegetables. She seemed to buy vegetables often, so she was very good at picking occasionally. Qin Amlin would also raise his eyes and look at her conflicted expression. At this moment, she was unexpectedly cute. He actually took a picture and posted it on his social media account. Chapter 12:26. This undoubtedly solidified Yi Liangxiu's position. Even Imo Xiaoqi did not dare to provoke her anymore. After all, she was President Qin's own girlfriend. Naturally, the nature was different. A pillow talk was enough to change a lot of things. Which one is good? Yi Liangxiu took out 2 onions and showed them to him. Qin Amlin was a little disgusted and said proudly, "I don't like to eat this." She looked at him in surprise and said, "You can't be picky." He didn't want to eat it, so she threw the 2 onions into the shopping cart. Yi Liangxiu. He gritted his teeth. Yi Liangxiu put on an innocent expression. "I'm doing this for your health." She gave a rare smile and wanted to go pick something else. However, he grabbed her arm and said in a low voice, "What can I do when I'm healthy?" He said it vaguely and hinted at something. Yi Liangxiu had done it with him before, so she understood immediately and blushed. Yi Liangxiu looked away. President Qin can ask about your harem. He let go of her hand and said with a smile, "That's a bit sour." "No, it's not." She sighed. Their relationship was that of a capitalist and a commodity. Even if they were to buy groceries and cook at his apartment, they both had their own motives. She coveted his protection, and he coveted her company. Neither of them said anything in the end. They paid the bill and went back to his apartment. He was very busy after he came back. She went to wake him up after cooking, but he did not raise his head and simply ordered, "Help me clean the bedroom." She remembered that his hourly employee had asked for leave. She was now considered half a servant to him. Hence, she took a clean rag and went to clean the place he lived in. Was like a sample room. There was no extra space, and the furniture was also white, black, and gray, which made it easy to clean. Yi Lianxiu found the drawer open while she was cleaning. She wanted to close it, but she accidentally found a few small boxes. One of them was open. She had seen that little thing at the entrance of the supermarket many times. Just as he was about to put it down, a person suddenly appeared at the door. It was Qin Anlin. He calmly said, "Basically, this is for making love." Yi Lianxiu quickly stuffed it back into the drawer, closed it quickly, and wiped his bedside table vigorously. Her strength was so great that it made his balls ache. He felt as if she was wiping a certain part of him with a cloth. "Time to eat." His tone became even more indifferent. She stopped her work at once and ran out before him. No matter how scheming she was only 19 years old after all. In this aspect, she was still a little shy. During the meal, she didn't utter a word. She sat up straight and had a good demeanor. Qin Amlin felt that he had not hired an etiquette teacher for nothing. After dinner, she was about to leave. Qin Amlin did not ask her to stay. When she was about to close the door, he sat in front of the piano in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. He opened the cover, and his slender fingers landed on it. A string of smooth notes glided past his fingertips. Yi Lianxiu's gaze was a little dazed. She stared for a long time before she said softly, "Can I play it? Come here." He stopped and looked at her longing gaze. Yi Lianxiu walked toward him. Every step she took felt like she was blessed by the god of fate. Finally, she sat beside him. Qin Amlin's chin rested on his index finger, and he asked calmly, "What songs can you play?" Chapter 1227. Qin Amlin was obviously stunned for a moment. Yi Lianxiu said, "I only know this song." He was a little speechless, but he still played along with her childish tune. She seemed to be very happy and played over and over again patiently. In the end, Qin Amlin just watched her play. After a long time, he asked, "Who taught you?" "My father." Her long hair was tied into a ponytail, and he could see the side of her face. At this moment, her eyelashes were drooping. If he could see her eyes, he would know how sad she was. "Qin Amlin, have you ever tried the people around you? The people you care about leave you one by one, and you can only remember them through one thing, or even one thing." Yi Lianxiu looked up at him. Her eyes were filled with stories, but he could not see the ending. Qin Amlin's voice was low. "Yi Lianxiu, it's not that I haven't lost something before. I've also lost something very important. Friendship, love, it's all gone overnight. But you have a harem," she reminded him. Qin Amlin looked at her helplessly. She was the first person who dared to say this to him, to talk about his private life. "There's evidence in your bedside table." She did not know why she said this. It seemed that she wanted to know something, or at least what he was thinking. "Yi Lianxiu, don't try to test me." His hands landed on the piano keys, and he played slowly. It was a serenade. He played very well, and his hands were slender and beautiful. One look, and one could tell that he came from a good family. Yi Lianxiu suddenly came to a realization and smiled bitterly with drooping eyes. They were not from the same world. Eventually, she left while he was playing the piano. He did not ask her to stay, just like their relationship. They just took what they needed. Qin Amlin listened to the sound of the door closing, and his fingers were in a mess. He stopped, sighed, and dialed Ing Jie's number. "Arrange for Yi Lianxiu to join the crew. You do as you see fit. My bottom line is that it's not a bad movie, and she's not allowed to do sex scenes." Ing Jie received the news and was a little surprised. 2 to 3 hours ago, President Qin was still her, and now he was turning his back on her. How far had he kicked her? But it was a good thing for Yi Liangxiu. She could join the crew in advance, and if she was lucky, she could become famous. Sister Ing had found quite a few scripts for Yi Liangxiu, but none of them were in the middle. In the end, there was a movie that was about to finish filming that needed to be replaced. Because the second female lead had a scandal, she was banned. Some of the scenes regarding the second female lead had to be res hot, and the production team was looking for someone to replace her. After the news got out, many people naturally flocked to it because the director and cast of the film were strong, and the investors behind it were also very powerful. In the end, Ing Jie defeated all the competitors and sent Yi Liangxiu to the crew. Ing Jie also valued this opportunity and followed her like a nanny. Fortunately, although Yi Liangxiu did not have much foundation, she was very talented. In Qin Anlin's words, she was suitable for the big screen. The second female lead in this literary film loved the male lead, but couldn't get him. In the end, she became crazy and hysterical, which was quite a test of her skills. The director was quite satisfied with Yi Liangxiu's performance, but there was one thing that was not quite right. When the female lead was acting with the male lead, her emotions could not express the feelings of love and hate. After being stuck for 8 times, the director finally came to yell at her. After that, he was stuck for 2 more times. Chapter 1228. There were even people who mocked Yi Liangxiu for relying on her connections, and that she didn't have any acting skills at all. The director felt like fucking a dog inside. Miss Yi, I want you to show the pain of killing the person you love with your own hands. The director put his hands on his waist and said fiercely, But what about you? What's with the strange pleasure on your face? Pain, do you know pain? The director said angrily, Yi Liangxiu, do you know what love is? The love between a man and a woman. Yi Liangxiu wanted to say something, but a voice interrupted her. She's still young. She doesn't understand. The person's voice was low, and even the director was a little surprised. Yi Liangxiu turned around and looked at Qin Anlin in a daze. She looked a little embarrassed because she didn't want him to see her acting badly. Ing Jie was also surprised. She went forward and whispered a few words to Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin raised an eyebrow and glanced at Director Zhang. What movie is it? Director Zhang was stunned. President Qin usually didn't care about these things. He was also very strict with his artists, even more so than directors like them. Why was he asking about it now? Director Zhang didn't dare to say anything, so he said softly, this part. Director Zhang was a senior director and was quite famous in the country. However, in front of a big shot like Qin Anlin, he was still a little inexperienced, so he had to give face to President Qin. Qin Anlin picked up the script and looked at it casually. Then he looked at Yi Liangxiu and said, You've never liked anyone before? Yi Liangxiu pursed her lips and said in a low voice, No. Qin Anlin looked straight into her eyes. She looked up and looked back at him. There was a hint of warmth in the air. The director could smell it, so he coughed lightly. Actually, it's okay to fix it. You don't have to be too serious. Qin Anlin smiled and looked at Yi Liangxiu's little face. He then said to Director Zhang, I'll go through this scene with her first. We'll start filming in half an hour. Of course, Director Zhang agreed, so he told the staff to rest for half an hour. Qin Anlin looked at Ing Jie and asked, Is there a lounge? Ing Jie sighed softly. Yi Liangxiu was just a minor supporting character now. How could the crew arrange a lounge for her? But if President Qin wanted it, of course, there would be one. Ing Jie was Ing Jie. She did things quickly and soon got the room ready. Qin Anlin took a few steps forward. Seeing that no one was following him, he took 2 steps back and knocked on Yi Liangxiu's head. Hurry up and follow me. She obviously hadn't come back to her senses. She looked at him in a daze. Qin Anlin's lips moved closer to hers. His voice was a little hoarse. Yi Liangxiu, are you overjoyed? This is my first time acting as a supporting actor. She came back to her senses and looked down. No way. It took Qin Amlin 2 seconds to figure out what she meant. She was probably referring to the time when he told the media that they were a couple. He smiled. That time, you were the one who acted as a supporting actor for me. Jie walked behind him and looked at the couple in front of her. Acting as a supporting actor? Was it really just acting as a supporting actor? Didn't President Qin feel that he seemed to be too immersed in his role? However, Jie wouldn't say anything. She just followed them quietly. When they reached the door of the suite, she closed the door and stood guard. For a moment, she felt as if she was pulling a certain object. Chapter 1229. There was a hint of bruise under his eyes, as if he hadn't rested well for a long time. Yi Lianxiu was a little dumbfounded. Didn't he say that they were going to rehearse? Why was he sleeping here? Yi Lianxiu pursed her lips and carefully tugged at his sleeve. President Qin? She didn't dare to disturb him. After tugging at him, she didn't dare to tug at him when he didn't respond. She just looked at him. In her heart, she was thinking that falling asleep after 2 seconds was similar to some kind of animal. She didn't make a sound and just sat there smiling. Yi Lianxiu was usually quite cold, but at this moment, she was smiling a little foolishly. Qin Amlin opened one eye and looked at her with one hand behind his head. His voice was a little hoarse. You want to rehearse? She grunted and said in a coquettish tone, I won't. I'll be scolded again later. Qin Amlin looked at her and smiled. Are you afraid of me or Director Zhang? This is different. She counted her fingers. Director Zhang is different. He's only directing once, but I've signed a long-term contract. It was really rare for her to be like this. Qin Amlin couldn't help but laugh. Feeling wronged? Regretting it? He hadn't seen her for about 10 days. During this period of time, he happened to be in this city on a business trip. He told himself that he just wanted to come and see Jie. But when he saw her, he realized who he really wanted to see. When he was with her, he felt sleepy just lying down. The sleepiness that he hadn't felt for a long time hit him, and he felt very comfortable. But he still teased her a little. It was quite interesting. Yi Lianxiu shook her head. No. He smiled and caressed her delicate face with his fingers. He didn't realize that this action was so natural and so gentle, and she was probably used to being treated like this by him. She didn't resist. They just stared at each other. I know that Yi Lianxiu wants to be the empress. He smiled gently, without his usual sternness. Perhaps it was the bed beneath him that made him relax, or perhaps it was the person on the bed that made him relax. Yi Lianxiu saw that he was not going to act with her, so she wanted to take the script and read it herself. However, her body was hugged by him, and they fell together. His voice was a little low. Sleep with me for a while. She hugged the script with his warm body behind her and lowered her eyes. President Qin, I have to read the script. She bit her lower lip and added, otherwise, Director Zhang will scold me again. He maintained the posture of hugging her from behind with one hand, one arm around her waist, and the other stroking her red lips. His voice was a little hoarse. Aren't you afraid that I'm afraid of you? I'm afraid. Her voice was trembling, but at the same time, there was a hint of flattery in it. Qin Amlin smiled. It was a satisfied and joyful smile. Then he turned around and pressed her under his body. Her hair was spread on the pillow, and she was wearing a pair of trousers from the national era. She looked like a university student from that era, extremely pure and innocent. Qin Amlin now knew what it meant to be cold and seductive. Yi Lianxiu raised her head and looked at him. Her slender fingers rested on his shoulder. Her red lips parted slightly. I didn't do this part. Was he going to do a bed scene with her now? She didn't remember there being such a part. Qin Amlin smiled. His voice was a little hoarse. Yi Lianxiu, if you do this part well, you will probably be able to act the heart-wrenching scene well. Chapter 1230. Yi Lianxiu's eyes widened as she looked at him. She couldn't believe that he would do this to her. Lianxiu, close your eyes. His voice was a little low and deep. Close your eyes and enjoy it. Imagine that I'm the man you like. and imagine that you're going to kill me later." When he kissed her again, his kiss was very passionate, almost swallowing her little mouth. The turbulent waves of passion drowned her, and her body seemed to be floating on the surface of the water, floating and floating. His lips moved to her ear and whispered, "Liangqiu, kill me, no." She shook her head as tears gathered in her eyes and slowly slid down from the corner of her eyes. She didn't want to do that. "No." Her voice was heart-wrenching. She sat up abruptly and hugged his neck. "Qin Anlin, I don't want you to die." She murmured his name. Her voice was trembling, and her body was as soft as water. In her eyes, there was struggle, pain, and unrequited love. "All right, you can go and film now." Qin Anlin patted her shoulder and smiled. However, the slender body hanging on his body refused to let go of him. She kept hugging him and refused to let go. Qin Anlin laughed. She was really like a child. He reached out and held her little hand. He said in a low voice, "Liangqiu, it's me. We're not in a play." Her eyes were too deep, and it was obvious that she was still immersed in the play. Yi Minxiu hugged his back and pulled her face on his shoulder. She smiled gently, but her voice was filled with a strong sense of sadness. "Qin Anlin, I don't want you to leave me." Even when he passed by a cluster of flowers, when such a girl leaned into his arms and said such words to him, his heart still palpitated a little. Most women would say to him, "Qin Anlin, I don't want to leave you." But Yi Liangqiu said, "I don't want to leave you." As a man, he felt the satisfaction of being needed. This was something that no other woman had ever given him. Qin Anlin smiled faintly and reached out to stroke her head. "Silly, I won't leave you." Just as his heart was starting to loosen up, the person in his arms straightened up. Her tearful little face carried a faint smile. The smile was even a little mischievous. "Qin Anlin, what do you think of my acting?" She had been acting all along. At that moment, Qin Anlin also felt that his face was a little hot. He seemed to have been a little self-indulgent just now. Thus, she pursed her lips and lay flat again. She said lightly, Come over later." "President Qin, you should rest." Her voice was very obedient. "I won't disturb your sleep." Qin Anlin sat up immediately. Looking at her, he said slowly, "Come here and be my pillow." After that, they spent a lot of time together, even in the same bed. Almost nothing happened between them. She was the one who accompanied him to sleep, but it was only to accompany him to sleep. She was held in Qin Anlin's arms as a pillow. Secretly, she wondered if he had a fetish. After a long time, Qin Anlin also felt that something was wrong with him, so he went to see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist said to him, "Qin, you probably like that girl." At that moment, he looked at her and asked her to be his pillow. Yi Liangqiu got up and stuffed a pillow into his body. This will do. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.